it occurs to me that in my initial review, I didn't really bring up much about what the hell you can play in Rifts. So I'm just going to do a little brief read through of the character class list and just kind of give some of my thoughts on what they are and maybe describe them as needed for people who are not familiar with the game. There's one, two, three, four, five, six broad categories with a bunch of actual classes. They're called OCCs in this game, occupational character class. The Men of Arms starts off with combat cyborgs. Not necessarily my favorite character class I would choose for myself. Not that I play much. I tend to be more the GM type, but definitely an option if you rolled poorly with physical attributes. Rifts and other Palladium games are, I mean, you can always have house rules and do things like roll 4 die and drop the 1 and that kind of stuff. But they have the more old school draconian roll down the line 3 die 6. The thing is, by doing that though, if you roll really well, you can get a bonus dice, so you can have attributes that spike up to 30 under like super insane circumstances. But you can also get stuck with 3s. But several of the Men of Arm classes are augmented humans. Part of the Rift setting is because the world has been flooded with all this supernatural threats and alien technologies and undescribable stuff, beings, mutations. Regular humans have had to like really up their game in order to defend themselves, and that's part of why the good guys in this game, quote unquote, the coalition, are fascist militaristic, because they're the only people who had their shit together enough to survive in such a fucking environment. So a lot of the Men of Arms are enhanced humans using robotics, bionics, chemical enhancements, surgical experimentations, all that kind of stuff. There's character classes are spread throughout the Rift's books. The stuff in the basic book is not at all the limitations. These are just kind of like your core palette, your basic starting points, and then like if you want to get really tied down into a certain region, world books present more. That's one of the differences between how the Rift books are structured than how Dungeons and Dragons does things. Dungeons and Dragons will have like a book purely for DM information, occasionally a book that DMs and players are allowed to read. The core 3 books, you got the book that's only for players, the book that only DMs are supposed to read, and then the monster manual, which is kind of also like really the monster manual and the DM book I always felt should just be one book. I guess it's handy to have them separate so you can flip through them at the same time while you're playing. And that's really the only justification for it. The way these guys do things is the core book presents human characters mostly. There's a couple of exceptions, and we'll get to them. But it's in the world books that you start to get into a lot more of the unique DBs, they called, for dimensional beings, mutant creatures, and other things that inhabit the planet. It's also where, like, instead of having monster manual, most of the creatures are scattered throughout the various world books. They do have a book called DBs in North America, which is very handy, and I'm planning on getting it soon because it's pretty much essential, especially for North American settings. And I hear that they're working on a bestiary finally. They have one for their fantasy game that's related. Like all their games are compatible, and so in a way, all their sub games are kind of like in themselves dimension books for Rifts, which is kind of a neat little trick to help sell their other stuff. But their fantasy setting is actually pretty interesting. It's also an alternative to look into for D&D players. Anyway, let's get back to what I was starting off with. Yeah, if you roll really poorly for your physical characteristics, a cyborg's a good option because your body is torn apart and replaced with a robot. But that also makes certain things rather clunky. This is not a setting where, like, well, with some unique things here and there in other books, you might come across it. But the basic cyborgs in the basic book don't like bioheal or anything like that. If you get blown to pieces, you're going to have to pay a lot of money to get that shit fixed. and oddly, the economy in Rifts is kind of an issue, and I'm not necessarily the best qualified to talk about that one, but things are mightily expensive. So I guess there's just like horrible inflation in the Rift setting because the characters have to make ridiculous amounts of money doing really basic things in order to be able to afford the basic equipment they need. I find so. Yeah, I guess it's just hyperinflation. It's like global Zimbabwe. Anyway, I mean, combat cyborg. I mean, you're RoboCop or the Terminator with a human brain still, and you run around with giant guns and you shoot things. It's fairly self-descriptive. Other than that, the crazy. These are another type of the augment humans. In this case, it was experiments to try to induce psychic powers in people who do not have psychic powers by brain implants, and it kind of worked, but it also drove the recipients of the implants insane. That's why they're called crazies. This was written in the 80s. There's going to be things here and there that are probably not politically correct anymore. We're just going to have to learn to handle that together. The Cyber Knight. This is your blatant Jedi ripoff of quotes. They're like this roaming. They're only in North America. They're not a European or British phenomenon in the setting. There's can't remember the name of the guy who's founded them. Anyway, they're founded like somewhere in the western states, and they're small, little scattered cult of warriors who are able to summon a psychic sword. And part of the way that they brand themselves as being official Cyber Knight is they have these plates of mega damage. That's another subject I'm going to have to get into at some point. Material that's like bonded to their chest, so it gives them a little bit more armor protection. There's two tiers of damage in this game. There's SDC, which is standard structural damage capacity, and then there's MDC, which is the mega damage. Mega damage is supposed to represent the overwhelming power of supernatural force and also super high technologies. 1 point of mega damage is 100 points of standard SDC damage. So, like, technically, if your character's unarmored and you get shot with a very minor laser pistol, just like in Star Trek, your ass is vaporized. But it's also possible to be wearing a suit of power armor that lets you, like, lightly brush off dragon breath and then blow its head off with a railgun. So, I mean, just don't leave your armor lying behind and you'll be fine. Everyone gets a suit. Like it's that kind of environment. Everyone, you're all playing survivors and descendants of survivors. So Cyber Knights are like kind of just like roaming do-gooders, I guess is the basic way to put it. And yeah, very kind of like the older idea of what the Jedi were before the prequels came out, I guess is the caveat. These are prequel Jedi Knights, if you catch what I mean. You might not. Glitter Boy. It's one of the most iconic things from the game. One of several iconic things from the game, but Glitter Boys are awesome, but also like really troublesome. And I find very few people seem to want to play them. They want to have the armor, but they don't want to have the actual OCC. They want to play something else and just use the armor. But Glitter Boys. There's got to be a better pick. Here we go. Let's see if we It was a team of Glitter Boys that caused the trouble in South America that helped spark the apocalypse, the cataclysm. They're a superpower armor that's covered in this laser-resistant reflective material, and they carry a gigantic rail gun called a boom gun that can fire projectiles at like Mach 3 or something like that. And just the simple little magnetic rounds, doesn't require gunpowder or anything like that. It does require like energy source. There's a lot of like miniaturized nuclear power in this setting because the apocalypse didn't happen until like late in the 21st century. So anyway, back to my page. After the Glitter Boy, we have the Headhunter, kind of a partial cyborg. You're just your basic mercenary with a robot arm kind of character. Juicers. They can be fun to play, but a lot of people always want to worm out of the deal of a juicer. Juicers are people who are chemically enhanced instead of robotically enhanced, to a point where it's like Arnold Schwarzenegger times 1,000. Uh, they have they could actually take a real small amount of MDC damage, like maybe 1 or 2 points, and might be able to live. Uh, Phenomenal boost attributes. Another great option if you roll really poorly in your physical categories. But it burns them out and they die after 5 years. And Palladium games, you do not level up fast. So your character lifespan actually can be an issue. And yeah, people tend not to like the fact that after 5 years, like no matter what, you're doomed. And then they have kind of a generic merc soldier, the robot pilot. There's all sorts of giant robots and power armors in the setting to own and operate, and the robot pilot specializes in piloting robots. And next major category would be your adventurers and scholars. And there's actually some of the more interesting and fun options that not enough players take. Body fixer, which is kind of like your renegade doctor. A city rat, which is the rogue of the Rift setting. Cyberdoc, similar to the body fixer, but specializes in cybernetic systems. Operator, one of my all-time favorite Rift characters I ever played when I was a teenager was an operator. It's just a traveling mechanic. Rogue scholar, you just know a bunch of stuff. You're like Indiana Jones in this horrible apocalyptic nightmare, and way less skilled and surviving it in many ways, but you're like the one dude who actually knows what's going on at all. Similar, sub-related would be the rogue scientist, who's maybe a little bit more proactive and is going out there trying to do active research and stuff. They have a vagabond, which is just a very, it takes a diehard role player to want to play a vagabond, because they're low on skills, very low on special abilities. Who the hell would play that? Wilderness Scout, that's another core adventure and scholar that actually is fairly popular. It's in some ways and skill set like a really highly specialized rogue scholar, I almost want to say, but very natural feeling for this setting because so much of the earth has become wilderness again. Then we have the practitioners of magic, because this is a setting where magic is real. There's one of the newer additions to the game that I'm not terribly fond of, but they have the Elemental Fusionist, which is you take two different elements and slam them together, and so you're an earth fire guy kind of thing. One of the super classics and one of the best character classes in the game is the Line Walker. That's just kind of like your generic wizard for this setting, but they very tied and have some special abilities related to the nature of ley lines and how they work in the setting. So it makes them a little bit different than just your generic standard D&D type wizard, unformatted. Then there's also a spin-off character class called the Leyline Rifter, who specializes in dimensional travel and opening and closing of rifts. There's also the Mystic, which is a psychic mage. Shifters. It's what makes the Leyline Rifter doubly redundant, because it's redundant to the Leyline Walker, and it's also redundant to Shifters. Shifters are also dimensional specialists, but I guess because they have more of a focus on summoning and dealing with dark powers, because they're like pseudo, what if witches hunted down the devil and forced him into the contract instead of the other way around, almost kind of an attitude. That's a shifter. They're actually pretty cool. Techno Wizards, that's another one of the iconic things I would say to Rifts. There, because of the setting having so much technology in it prior to the reemergence of magic, they're magicians who have learned to focus magic into technological constructs. So I guess they're the steampunk class. There's several psychics described in the core book. Also, there's a book called Scyscape about a psychic city hidden in I want to say, was it Ohio? Um, Somewhere in the Magic Zone. And it describes a ton of new psychics, but you got your basic. Well, they got caveat here. Two of these, I would say, really should be under the racial character class categories instead of psychics. But anyway, listed bursters, super pyrokinetics is what a burster is. They're one of kind of your comic booky characters in the setting. They're psychics who, because of the influence of ley line energy, um, their pyrokinetic abilities are like turn them into flame beings almost, and it's just way more over the top than just the standard pyrokinetic power would normally allow, even under extreme circumstances. Dog boys, another one of the iconic Refs character classes. These are humanoid dogs that have been engineered by the Coalition to serve mankind, and they're quite happy to do that because dogs are like that. The Lone Star book that I have has a lot to do about dog boys, and so when I get to doing my review of it, we'll go into quite a good detail about them. Psy Stalkers. These are another human mutant race that during the chaos years after the apocalypse, they're kind of like psychic vampires that learn to feed off of the various like demonic things that had been coming through the rifts, and there's two different versions of them. There's the wild nomadic, almost Native American-esque wild Psy Stalkers, and then there's these trained Psy Stalkers that work for the Coalition that are kept under like real tight leash control because the Coalition is real uptight about like everything. They're human fascists. They're not. They don't give a shit about human skin color or any of the kind of the crap. But if you have mutations, or if you have psychic abilities, or if you practice magic, or have relations with DBs of whatever kind, you can get the fuck out of our fucking awesome giant super city. So, and like most of the time in most adventures, they're framed as the bad guys, but because of things that are going on in the ongoing timeline of the setting, they're kind of like actually really secretly the good guys. It's the Coalition's complicated. They're going to need their own video. Mind Melters. That's another character class for psychics. They're just kind of your generic super psychic Charles Xavier type. The only racial character class that they have listed as a racial character class in the main book are dragons. Well, dragon hatchlings. And I guess it's included to kind of like have at least something to show that like, hey, anything's possible. But and many year hindsight, I kind of find the inclusion of dragon hatchlings to be a wee bit of a mistake. So, but hey, everyone's their cells and they're available. Of course, as if you're a game master, you can always tell your players to go hike up a trail and not choose dragon. Then there's also the other major category left is the Coalition soldiers. Several Coalition occupations for their military they have a basic Coalition grunt. Samus pilots. Samus are these really badass power armors that got wings and jetpacks on the back. They look really cool. Let's see, I know they got a painted color picture of one of them. There's two color art sections. Oh, three. Yeah, the Ultimate Edition broke it up differently. Okay, here we go. That's a Samus. Like I said, the Coalition totally got this fascist thing going on, but you're fighting to protect the very last remnants of humanity from being eaten, literally. So, fuck it. They also have a Coalition military specialist, kind of like your SEAL Team 6 of the Coalition types, and a Coalition technical officer, which could kind of be played either as your techie, or you could play up the officer leaning of that and focus them a bit more into command and not having actual field experience or skill, but instead having tactical skill. There's also more OCCs in some of the other books that go into further detail about the coalition. So anyway, that's the basic collection of characters you get to play, just with what's included in the basic book. They don't go into detail into a lot of DBs. Like I said, you picking up the DBs in North America World Book is that is something I would consider to be a core book, even though on their website it's not listed under their core books. And I'll get into some recommendations as to what books are really best to pick up for someone starting off. So, because basically you can follow along with me as I rebuild my collection. So anyway, that's it, and I'll talk to y'all later.